Mhm.
Hey, Arlene, it's good to see you again. And Janet, and I know John's back there too. Today, I believe we're going to be kind of doing a little, an intermission almost, or an interlude. We're going to jump into something that's not one of the standard feasts, but is a well-known feast amongst the Jewish people. And that is the Feast of Hanukkah. Is that what we're doing today?
Yes, that's exactly right. So because the history of Hanukkah is so essential to understanding why it is so important to the Jewish people, I want to start with things that are a little more familiar to all of you. I want to show you this Hanukkah menorah, and you will see, can you see it okay, Andy? Can you see?
Yes, we can see it. Oh, it's even lighting up.
Yes, that's right. I want to show you this Hanukkah menorah, which is something that would be more familiar to you. And you'll notice that there is one candle in the very middle that is higher than the others. And as believers, we see that representing Jesus high and lifted up. And then each night, another candle is lighted until they are all lighted. It's always from this direction, left to right. It's got to be just right. And Jewish people know all that. They'd think it was really funny if you started at the other end. So they know all these things.
Yeah, but she sees it from the other side.
Yeah, I was going to say, when you lit it up from our right to left, but obviously you were looking at it from your direction, left to right.
Yes. Should I turn it around, Andy, and do it again?
I think that everybody who's viewing this can understand that you are doing it from your perspective.
Okay. All right. All right, folks. So this is the one I wanted you to see because it gives you an idea of what the menorah looks like. And I'll just turn it around so it's on the right side. Well, it looks like when it's all done. And in the midst of lighting these candles, the Jewish people have passages from the scriptures that they read, and also reminders of what this time means. And here's just simply another menorah. It's a brass one, so it's heavy, but as you can see, it also has the middle candle high and lifted up.
And 8 branches.
And the 8 branches. However, this is a non-kosher Hanukkah menorah.
No, it's not a Hanukkah menorah.
Well,
it's a standard menorah.
It's a standard menorah, but this is not a kosher Hanukkah menorah because it doesn't have the middle candle high and lifted up. It's just 7 lights around it. So you can see that that looks very different. So we should know what a Hanukkah menorah looks like.
But this is what would be in the temple.
No, it's not. Okay. So we also have, I'm so grateful to the Catholic people who have kept this feast alive. And so I own a Jerusalem Bible that teaches me all about Hanukkah and all of the history of it, because the history is essential to the coming of our Lord Jesus. And there are other just happy little things here, nice little napkins, things like that. And then I have several dreidels. You may have heard about dreidels. There is a game that Jewish people play, and it's just spinning these little dreidels, and depending on what they're going to experience with these dreidels depends on how good of a dinner they're going to get. So it's just a lot of fun things. I have a beautiful dreidel here from Israel, but it doesn't work. So I just thought you'd like to see what it looks like. So I hope you can all see this. I just wanted to introduce you a little bit to those parts of Hanukkah that you might have already heard about. And now we'll really move into why Hanukkah? How did it happen? Why is this important? And we'll start in a place where you might not have thought, but we have this diagram. Is that available to the people right now? Can they, maybe I can put it this way. You can see it this way?
Okay, I'll go ahead and pull that one up. This should be right about there. All right, so they should be able to see the intertestamental Jewish history now.
Okay, and if you aren't able to see this, then I'll just explain it to you. We start with a man that you're all familiar with, called, his name was Ezra. And we also start with a man that you might not have thought about, Cyrus the Medo-Persian. Cyrus is the person that allowed 50,000 Jews to return from exile in Babylon. And this was commanded in Isaiah chapter 45. And it's just a remarkable thing that this man does obey the Lord and allows the Jews to go back to their homeland. And the rebuilding of the temple began then. And over here, we see what was called then the Knesset. And you'll recognize that name because today's modern government in Israel is called the Knesset. And this first Knesset it was held by scribes and the Great Assembly, and it eventually ended up being the Sanhedrin that we read about in the New Testament. And now today, as you remember, the modern day Israelites, they call their government the Knesset, which I think is quite interesting that they're remembering this history. So we'll look toward the history now. 50,000 Jews returned from exile at the direction of Cyrus the Medo-Persian, and that's a miracle. The rebuilding of the temple began with the altar at the Feast of Trumpets. This would have been in the fall. And Ezra writes about this in his book in chapter 3. However, it did not contain the Ark of the Covenant. And you remember that the Ark of the Covenant was the only piece of furniture that was inside the Holy of Holies, and that the high priest entered that area once a year, only in his white clothes, and asked the Lord to forgive the sins of the people of Israel on Yom Kippur. We don't know to this day what happened to the Ark of the Covenant. And right now, if there were a temple, and now there is the Dome of the Rock that is sitting on the temple site, but one day it will be rebuilt. That's a promise of the Lord, that when Messiah comes, he will rebuild the temple. And I'm sure the Ark of the Covenant will return. But at this point, no one knows what happened to the Ark of the Covenant. There are a lot of theories, but no one knows. And the rebuilding, or the attempt to rebuild the temple, was not without opposition. And we read about that in Ezra 4-6. The work was completed, and all 12 tribes were represented in that building. And that's recorded in 2 Chronicles 11 and 15, and also Ezra chapter 6. Ezra the scribe returned. Jewish tradition and history ascribed to Ezra the title of the second Moses. He transliterated the scriptures from ancient Phoenician script into the Aramaic block script known as Hebrew today. He translated the scriptures and gave them back to the people, and you read about the great celebration when the people could actually read the scriptures for themselves again in Nehemiah chapter 8. He removed, this is a big word, anthropomorphisms from scripture in the translation to avoid allowing Israel to return to idolatry. Anthropomorphisms are any words that would indicate a human attitude of the Father himself. And people would become confused about that, and they would build idols to what they thought represented God. And so Ezra removed all of that. He translated the scriptures and gave them back to the people, which was wonderful. He established the reading cycle used in the synagogue to this day. John and I follow that, and each Saturday we try to read the same scripture portion that Jews all over the world are reading. Sometimes we miss, but we love it when we can do that. He finished 2nd Chronicles, wrote Ezra, possible Nehemiah. Tradition says he called the Great Assembly, or Knesset. That's what we were talking about at the very beginning from the diagram, that he called that Great Assembly of 120 members, and the Zugot, or pairs of scholars that were descended from this assembly, were set up by him. In Jesus' day, that was Hillel and Shammai. And you might remember that sometimes in Jesus' time and in the Gospels, people do inquire of these two scholars about what is the right thing to do. It's helpful for us to know what was the difference in pre-exile and post-exilic Judaism. Before the Babylonian captivity, Israel was a tribal society, and it moved after the captivity to a national society. In the early days, before the Babylonian exile, the kingdom without to the kingdom within. People were much more concerned with knowing God as someone they can truly relate to after they got back than they felt before they ever left. So as horrible as it was for the people to be exiled from their land, we see that God used it for their good. There was a solely temple focus to a synagogue, school, desert, and temple focus after the Babylonian exile. Before that exile, there were kings, prophets, and priests. Now there would be scribes, priests, teachers, and individuals. There was never again a king of the Jewish people after the Babylonian exile, and never again idolatry. And that is Ezra's great legacy. We want to turn now to the world of the Greeks, because now we'll enter into the actual events that took place that caused Hannakuh, what we call Hannakuh, the battle for religious freedom. Alexander the Great, the spiritual descendant, that is, philosophical descendant of Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and the son of Philip Macedon, conquered the known world like a bolt of lightning in 334 BC. Excuse me for a moment while I change my page here. Alexandria was established in Egypt in 332 BC and held a large Jewish population with an enormous synagogue. Now you will remember after Jesus was born and Herod tried to get rid of him by having all the boys under 2 years of age put to death. Horrible, horrible thing. But you remember that the Lord wakened Joseph from his sleep and told him to escape. And he and Miriam and the baby escaped into Egypt. So you can see that the Lord had prepared the way by having a large Jewish population in Egypt for a period of time. Hellenism looked different in every society as it fused local culture with Hellenistic thought. And the events that will cause the event of Hannakuh are right around the corner, because Hellenism was the big deal. Alexander did not force Hellenism upon the Jews. The Lord gave him, I wonder if he knew who it was, the Lord gave him a vision of the temple and of the godly priest Simon the Just, encouraging him in his conquests. So he allowed the Jews to live according to the law of God. Alexander died in 323 BC. His conquered lands from Greece to India were divided among his 4 generals. The one that concerns us the most right now is Egypt and the Ptolemies. They controlled Palestine from 301 to 198. This was a time of peace. The Ptolemies were close to pure Greek thought and philosophy, but they didn't force their ways upon the Jews. They translated the Septuagint in 250 BC, and you all are aware, I'm sure, that our New Testaments, the original language in our New Testaments is Greek, and this is why that is the case. Syria, or the Seleucids, controlled Palestine from 198 to 165. Antiochus III, remember this name, Antiochus III overcame the Ptolemies and encouraged the Jews to continue in their law. So far, so good. But now the really tragic events take place. In 168 BC, Antiochus IV Epiphanes wanted the Hebrew temple treasury. He forced Hellenism upon the Jews. He tried to get them to do things to renounce their faith. He told them to write on their doorposts, "I have nothing to do with the God of Israel." The Jews demanded a passive resistance by simply removing all their doorposts. They did other similar things so that they wouldn't have to obey his evil rules. And the Samaritans at this time helped the Syrians, which is why in the New Testament, the Samaritans and the Hebrews were still at odds with each other. They were to abandon Torah study. Festival observances were not allowed. They could not observe Sabbath. They could not circumcise their children, all of their little boys. All of these things were banned by Antiochus IV. During those years, 40,000 Jews were brutally killed because they refused to follow Antiochus IV regulations. The temple was desecrated with a pig on the altar, and the statue of Zeus in the likeness of Antiochus IV was erected in the temple. And we read about this in Daniel 9:27. Jesus references this for the future in Matthew 24:15. Jews throughout the land were to eat pork as a sign that they renounced their faith. Jewish youths were to join the races and the games. Our Olympics have come out of these games. They are different today, but that's where it all began. They were to join the races, games in the theaters and hippodromes, offer sacrifice to Greek gods, the cult of the body. Would Jerusalem become a polis? Under Alexander the Great, any city, and we have lots of polises still in our world today, but Jerusalem was never called a polis. Like there are metropolis, other words like that would be common to us. This is where they began. So the real issue here was a Jewish civil war between the separatists and the Hellenizers. The diabolical goal here was the annihilation of the people of Israel before Messiah was born by having them assimilate into a Greek culture. Well, it didn't work. The Maccabees of Modin overcame the Syrians in a miraculous defeat. Only by God's grace could they have overcome. rescuing the line of Messiah. Hanukkah, the Feast of Dedication, or the Festival of Lights, is the memorial to this battle. And you have to read about that in the Apocrypha in 1 Maccabees 2, 1 through 28. It's a miraculous story. And then a little bit later, the Maccabees isolated themselves into a separate place in the area, and they refused to fight on the Sabbath. And so many of them were killed in that battle. And that is why to this day, the IDF in Israel today will fight on Shabbat because of the lesson of the Maccabees at that time. I cannot seem to get this separated. I'm sorry. Forgive me for a moment, please. There we go. Here we go. The descendants of the Maccabees became known as the Hasmoneans, probably named after Simon, the son of Mattathias, El Shimon. This word is linguistically connected to the priestly line of Zadok. The Maccabees were not in the line of Zadok, which became an issue as they continued. In the beginning, the Hasmonean rulers, that is the Maccabeans, were close to the separatists and were concerned for the religious freedom. The separatist party was known as Oniads or Hasidim or Parashim, and ultimately became the Pharisees. The Hellenists, those were the guys that were more concerned about being rich and happy, were known as Tobiads or Sadakim, and ultimately produced the Sadducees. They were the aristocrats with one foot in each world, and they controlled the temple. The Hasmonean line deteriorated and within 3 decades became politically corrupt in nature, which is very sad. These were the wonderful people that effected that wonderful victory over Antiochus IV. And they began to seek kingship as well as control of the priesthood. But the Parashim, that is the Pharisees, would not allow this, as they were neither of the royal Davidic line nor of the high priestly line. The Hasmoneans simply stated that they were chosen by God to lead Israel, and they really believed that. Alexander Janai is infamous for crucifying 800 Pharisees for their resistance to his leadership. That is almost unbelievable. These were Pharisees who were seen as the godly ones, the ones who really were, they sat in the seat of Moses according to Jesus, but sometimes they fell away from the people they should be. In 145 BC, a temple was built in Leonopolis, Egypt, to rival the temple in Jerusalem by a priest named Onias IV, demonstrating the struggles within the community. This temple stood until 73 BC, so it was not the temple in place when Jesus was born. The last period of independent Jewish sovereignty in Judea until 1948 was under Hasmonean rule from 142 to 65 BC and was achieved through political diplomacy with the rising power of Rome during the decline of the Seleucids. In 128 BC, John Hyrcanus forcibly converted the Idumeans, and Idumeans were descendants of Esau. Herod Antipater, an Idumean convert to Judaism, will follow the line of the Herods, and he will be the one who will seek to murder all of the newborn of Bethlehem. The Hasmonean line declined after the Civil War, instigated by the rivalry between Hyrcanus II and his brother Aristobulus. Rome eventually interceded, and Pompey of Rome entered Jerusalem in 63 BC. And that is why during the years of Jesus' life, Rome was in charge. The Taniatic period, that is the rabbis, begins here with Shimon ben Shattak in 100 BC. Herod the Great, the builder of the temple, was the mad and ruthless king of Judea. And it is amazing that his temple is still to this day considered the most beautiful that had ever been built. And there is a model of it in Israel. Of course, the temple will only stand when the Dome of the Rock is gone. The impact of Hellenism and the hatred of the Samaritans remains evident in the New Testament, and I'm sure you have seen that. And Jesus seeks to quell that, and he visits the woman of Samaria and shows us a much better way of considering one's enemies. The sects of Judaism in the 1st century, and this is the last time there was more than one way to be a Jew until the 18th century, paving the way for God to raise up the Messianic Jewish movement in our lifetime. The Sadducees became associated with the Hellenizers, assimilationists. However, a stereotype is inaccurate. They were the wealthy ones, the aristocratic. In Herod's day, they controlled the Sanhedrin. They accepted only the written law, not the prophets or the writings as binding. They did not accept the oral traditions of the Pharisees as authoritative. They were not highly regarded by the people at large, and they did not survive the destruction of the temple. There were 7 houses of Pharisees. They accepted the prophets and writings as scriptural truth. They developed the oral law and traditions as binding. They opposed Hellenization and assimilation. They were the protectors of the faith. They were opposed to the death. And we know Orthodox Jews to this day who are that strong in their faith. Interpreted the law to accommodate the times, wrote prayers to substitute for the temple rites. And this is what is used in an Orthodox Jewish synagogue today. They will pray the prayers that were developed at that time. They developed major doctrines that were in place by the 1st century: good and evil, immortality of the soul, heaven and hell, eschatology, the day of judgment, resurrection, and above all, the coming of Messiah. And they believe with all their hearts that the Messiah is coming. There are 2 groups of people who simply distance themselves from the temple altogether and some of its ways. Qumran, you've probably heard of, you may have been to Israel. Their priests left and went out to the desert because of the corruption of the Hasmonean line. They were attacked and butchered by Alexander Jannai, the Hasmonean king. They had families. On Yom Kippur, they would go to the temple. They took oaths. They had annual re-examinations. They had slaves according to the law, and they would fight. But the Essenes, on the other hand, withdrew for pious reasons. They were known for charity and prayer. They were known for their holy lifestyle. They were biblical mystics. They were very eschatological. They were celibate. They did not have families. They would not enter the temple at any time because they felt it had become so corrupt, and they would not take oaths. There was permanent membership for an Essene after they had immersed themselves in a mikveh. They could not take slaves, and they had no private property. Then there were the Zealots. These were the Jews who absolutely hated the presence of Rome, and they were determined to free Israel from foreign rule. Some were terrorists. From a political standpoint, they are the folks who brought Rome to Jerusalem in 70 AD. The Jewish last day of the 9th of Av remembers the destruction of the temple. In 135 AD, the Romans, angered over the 3rd Jewish uprising within 70 years, plowed up Jerusalem, applied the name of the ancient Philistines to Judea, renaming it Palestine, and renamed Jerusalem Aelia Capitolina, forbidding Jews to enter the city under the pain of death. It was into this century of chaos and unrest that Jesus of Nazareth was born in Bethlehem of Judea to a poor Jewish woman of the bloodline of David named Miriam, betrothed to a man named Joseph of the kingly line of David. It is miraculous that his line had survived throughout the centuries since the first promise in Genesis 3:15. It is just as miraculous that we know his name. May the Lord bless you. I hope that this history has not been so confusing that it left you confused, but it is a very important history that we should try to be aware of. Thank you, and God bless you.
Oh, thank you so much. As a Catholic, it was kind of a little bit, it's kind of neat to hear you referencing the Apocrypha and how that had affected you. I know I've got a lot of friends who are not Catholic, who have grown up in many of the different other Christian faiths, who have really helped me with my own faith. And so I'm glad that that we've been able to do that for you as well as a Catholic. Janet, do you have any questions? I suspect you might.
I never knew the good majority of this history. It's fascinating to me. I'm wondering, back in when you said the diabolical goal was the annihilation of the people of the covenant before Messiah could be born.
I'm sure I think that's what Satan had in mind.
Okay, so the people weren't saying, here's a prophecy, let's do what we can to make it not come true or make it fail. That the people didn't materialize that
right.
thought.
Yeah,
Okay.
Jen, I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah. So that's pretty clear that Satan certainly wanted to disrupt the plans of God, but he used the people to do it. The people didn't think of this themselves, really.
And there were people that were willing to cooperate with him.
Oh,
sure.
Always.
Oh, sure. Now I'm really going to show my ignorance. Can you remind me what a Hellenist believes? What's Hellenism?
It's a completely Greek culture.
Okay.
Hellenism is, yeah. And it's not that Greece is so bad, but it's not at all Jewish. And so for the people of Israel who were educated in a completely different time and culture, to force Hellenism on them, for instance, Hellenism forced them to stop circumcising their boys. Because Hellenism saw the beauty of the body, and nothing was to be done to destroy the beauty of the body.
Body culture.
Or the culture. Yeah. So when you go, for instance, to Europe, you will see statues of gods. Others, if you've been there, you might have seen that.
Yes.
That are revered to this day in the Hellenistic culture. Not that it takes the same path that this culture did, but that's the difference.
Okay. That's good. Was John the Baptist part of the Essene group? I think I heard that
many
somewhere.
people think he was.
Okay.
I don't think we know for sure, but he lived almost like an Essene. He never married. He lived really solely by himself. He was very into the scriptures, and he did prepare the way for the Lord Jesus. Yeah. That's right. And he took a Nazarite vow in that he never drank any alcoholic beverage all his life. He refused that. So I don't know, but it does seem that his lifestyle might have compared with the Essenes.
Okay.
And if I remember, you said Jesus celebrated what we would call Hanukkah now.
Mhm.
Could you just remind me of that? It was
Yes.
the feast of
Dedication. And it was the rededication of all that Antiochus had taken away. They could worship as they had been taught. And that's what the Maccabees tried to predict. It's unbelievable that eventually they turned away too. But for that short period of time, they were very faithful. And John 10:22 is where that's stated, that Jesus went up to Jerusalem for the Feast of Dedication.
The Feast of Dedication. Okay. And what would have been maybe some of the traditions, if you know, that Jesus might have done that might still even have survived today? Would it be the 8+1 menorah? Would he have seen that, do you think?
Oh, I'm sure he would have. One thing that we noticed that he said at the Last Supper with his disciples, he said, he handed them the wine and he said, I will not drink of this wine until I don't remember his exact words, but until I am with the Father. I don't remember that.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's what he says. He takes a Nazirite vow there. He won't drink wine. It's like what how John the Baptist lived. He takes a Nazirite vow there in that he won't drink wine until his suffering is complete.
Okay.
There are just lots of little things like that.
Yeah.
That's the one thing that comes to my mind.
Well, I just want to say thank you. This being right around what Christians would celebrate as Christmas, the coming of the Messiah, the Nativity, Mary and Joseph in Bethlehem, and at the same time of year that Hanukkah is also celebrated. I know it was a little bit of a detour from the outline of the entire series, but I think it's a very timely detour. And I just want to say thank you for being willing to put in the effort to add a chapter or add a lesson that may not have otherwise been in there.
It was my privilege, and it was a good review for me too. It really was. I hadn't taught this course for quite some time, so I really needed the time to go back and do that. And the Lord accomplished that by not letting our car start this morning, so I couldn't get to my physical therapy appointment, and I was able to study.
Oh,
Well, all things work to good for those who love the Lord. I believe that's sort of a paraphrase of a scripture, right?
I believe it is. Yes.
I have a question that I know your shirt says something that is Jewish. Oi.
Oh yeah. It says "Joy to the world."
Oi to the world. Oh,
Yeah.
I couldn't read the bottom part. I couldn't see it.
So, that's
can you
kind of how the
translate
Jews feel about the world these days. And one of their favorite words is "oy vey."
Oy vey. Does that mean oh my, or
Yeah. Oh, God forbid, or something like that. So they said, "Oy to the world," and they know that we sing "Joy to the World," so that's kind of a takeoff on that.
yes. Okay. I couldn't read the bottom, so all I saw was oi. So
Well, oy is a very acceptable Jewish word. I don't know if it's in the dictionary, but they say it all the time.
Oy vey. Oh dear.
Well, unless there's any other questions or anything else, go ahead and wrap this up.
And if you're interested, Hanukkah begins the evening of the 18th.
The 18th
at sundown. Remember, all Jewish days begin at sundown.
Oh.
Yes, it's the day after we break for Christmas break in the school. So in the past, I've celebrated Hanukkah with my students, saying the blessing and lighting the candle from left to right. Actually, from right to left. From right to left. Yes, I did it right. I promise. And And, but this year we break right before it even starts. I can't even like do the first lighting of the first candle with them this year. So, but we will talk about it.
Yes.
Because
And
I've
we'll
been
get-
doing it with them since they were in 5th grade and now they're in 8th grade and, you know.
Oh,
they-
that's great. It's so nice for them to know that.
Yes,
We should
Yeah.
be familiar with these things.
yes. And I do have a pack of dreidels. Can I ask you, I need to learn how to play the dreidel game. I don't know if this should be on recording, but is it have to do with like a little gambling? I don't know if I should do that with my students or not.
Oh.
I've always debated whether that I'm teaching them some kind of
Yes.
gambling game or not. So
I think that people think of it that way, but the biggest reward you'll get is an extra pancake. Or like everything that's made on Hanukkah evening has something to do with
Oh,
oil. Yeah.
okay.
So you fry these pancakes in oil, you fry donuts in oil. You might even get an extra donut. So it's not too serious of gambling.
So that could be something fun that we could do. I could.
It is fun.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, the principal says you can have pancakes or donuts if you want to, but not many.
Oh, okay. Now, we were going to take a break. When would you like to begin that? And
Let me
What is
go
this?
ahead and stop the recording and then we'll continue the conversation.
good.
All right. Well, again, thank you so much. And we will see you again soon.
Yes. Mhm.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Now I
God
got to
bless
find
you.
where it says recording. There it is.
Mhm.